All right, today we're jumping into one of the most dramatic periods you'll find in the history of ancient Israel. I'm talking about a story packed with corrupt kings, a mysterious and powerful prophet, and an epic showdown between the power of God and the rulers of the earth. Let's get into it. And this whole story really revolves around a huge question, one that's still relevant today. When a nation completely loses its way, when its leaders drag it into darkness, what does it actually take to pull it back from the brink? That's the big idea we're going to be exploring through these next 5 chapters. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at a kingdom that's just falling apart at the seams. Then, a prophet, Elijah, shows up out of nowhere. After that, we get to the legendary showdown on Mount Carmel. We'll even see Elijah's surprising burnout, and we'll finish up with a really complex mix of mercy, judgment, and even war. Okay, so let's dive right in. We're starting in 1 Kings chapter 16, right in the middle of the northern kingdom of Israel. And let me tell you, things go south fast. The whole kingdom is just stuck in this downward spiral of violence and corruption. The throne, it's basically a deadly game of musical chairs. Just look at how quickly this all falls apart. You have King Babash's dynasty, it gets cursed. His son, Elah, he gets assassinated just 2 years in. The guy who did it, Zimri, he only lasts a week before taking his own life. It's just chaos. Then, after a civil war, a guy named Omri takes the throne. Now, he's a smart political player. He even builds a new capital, Samaria. But spiritually, the Bible is clear. He was worse than anyone before him. So you've got this weird mix of political stability and total spiritual decay, which, as you'll see, perfectly sets the stage for his son, Ahab. And this right here, this is a whole new low for the kingdom. Ahab doesn't just, continue the bad habits of his predecessors. No, he makes it official policy. He marries Jezebel, a princess from Sidon, and then builds a temple to her god, Baal, right in the capital city. He literally makes idolatry the state religion. And we're not just talking about putting up another statue. Baal worship was a big deal. It involved these fertility cults and was a total rejection of Israel's covenant with their God. So what's the big lesson from all this chaos? It's that bad leadership creates a domino effect, right? Each king's little compromise just paved the way for the next king to be even worse. It's a classic example of how tiny spiritual shortcuts can eventually lead to a complete moral collapse. Okay, so the nation is hitting rock bottom. How does God respond to this mess? Well, just when things look their worst, this figure appears, seemingly out of thin air, the prophet Elijah. And his first move, he declares a drought over the entire land, a direct judgment for all their idolatry. So while the whole country is suffering from this drought that he announced, God takes care of Elijah in some pretty strange ways. First, he's told to hide out by a brook, and get this, ravens, which were considered unclean birds, are bringing him food every single day. Then, when the brook dries up, God sends him completely outside of Israel to a foreign widow who is literally about to starve to death. And this is where we see this incredible miracle unfold. This widow, she has just enough flour and oil left for one last meal for her and her son. That's it. But Elijah asks her to trust him and make him something to eat first. And because she takes that step of faith, her little bit of flour and oil just never runs out. It lasts for the entire famine. The lessons here are just so powerful, right? God shows he can provide in any way he wants, through ravens, through a foreign widow, with a bottomless jar of oil. And then it all culminates in this incredible moment when the widow's son actually dies, and Elijah, through God's power, raises him from the dead. I mean, what a statement. It proves that the God of Israel is the God of life itself. All right, fast forward 3 years. The famine is still going, and the story is building to its absolute climax. God tells Elijah it's time to go confront King Ahab, and this sets the stage for a public showdown on Mount Carmel. And get this, Mount Carmel was known as a prime spot for Baal worship. So it's going to be one prophet of God against 450 prophets of Baal on their home turf. So you've got the whole nation gathered around to watch this thing, and Elijah lays down the gauntlet. He looks at them and basically says, "How long are you going to waver between 2 opinions?" He confronts them right there, forcing them to finally make a choice. Is it God or is it Baal? The rules of the contest are super simple. Both sides get a bull, they prepare it for sacrifice, but no one is allowed to light a fire. Instead, they're going to call on their God. And as Elijah puts it, the God who answers by fire, he is God. I mean, the stakes couldn't be higher. It's one guy versus 450. The odds look impossible. So, for
hours, you have the prophets of Baal shouting, dancing, even cutting themselves. And nothing. Just silence. Then it's Elijah's turn. And to make a point, he has them douse his altar with 12 barrels of water. I mean, it's completely soaked, impossible to light. Then he says this short, simple prayer. And the response is instant and overwhelming. Fire falls from the sky and doesn't just burn up the sacrifice. It vaporizes the wood, the stones of the altar, the dirt, and even all the water in the trench around it. Just gone. In this one single, spectacular moment, God proves he is supreme. It wasn't even a competition. And the people, they see this undeniable display of power. They fall on their faces and they all shout, "The Lord, He is the God." It's such a powerful reminder that sitting on the fence, spiritually speaking, isn't really a neutral option. Now, you'd think after a victory like that, Elijah would be on top of the world, right? Feeling invincible. But the story takes this sharp, really human turn. Chapter 19 dives right into the tough reality of spiritual and emotional burnout. So Queen Jezebel hears what happened on the mountain, and she sends one single message to Elijah. "You're a dead man." And incredibly, the same guy who just fearlessly took on 450 prophets runs for his life. He ends up collapsing out in the wilderness, totally exhausted, alone, and just in complete despair, begging God to take his life. And God's response to this is so gentle. He doesn't yell at him. He sends an angel to bring him food, not just once, but twice, letting him rest and get his strength back. Then, later at Mount Horeb, God reveals himself. But it's not in the big, dramatic shows of power like a hurricane or an earthquake or a fire. No, it's in a quiet, gentle whisper, a still, small voice. This whole episode just reveals something so profound about God's character. He doesn't scold Elijah for being afraid. He takes care of his physical and emotional needs first. He shows him that real power isn't always in the fire and the spectacle. A lot of the time, it's in the quiet whisper. And maybe most importantly, he reminds his prophet who feels totally alone that he's not. There are still 7,000 people in Israel who haven't given up. Okay, for our last section, the focus shifts. We move away from the prophet and swing back to the corrupt King Ahab. And what we're about to see is a really complex picture of God, one that shows both unexpected mercy and, at the same time, very strict judgment. So out of nowhere, Israel gets attacked by this huge Syrian army. And God actually promises Ahab the victory. But, and this is key, it's not for Ahab's sake. It's so that Ahab will know that I am the Lord. Well, Israel wins, but then the Syrians make a big mistake. They assume Israel's God is just a god of the hills. So to prove that his power isn't limited by geography or anything else, God gives Israel another massive victory, this time out on the plains. But here's where it gets complicated. After this second miracle victory, Ahab decides to spare the enemy king. He basically substitutes his own political strategy for God's direct command. A prophet shows up and confronts him, making it crystal clear that this act of mercy was, in God's eyes, straight up disobedience. And the consequences are serious. The prophet tells him, "Your life will now be required for the life of the king you spared." So what are we supposed to take from this? Well, we see that God's main goal is to make himself known, and he's even willing to use a corrupt king like Ahab to do it. But we also get a really tough lesson here. God's commands aren't just suggestions. What might look like smart politics from a human perspective can actually be direct disobedience in God's eyes, and that comes with some very real consequences. And this whole incredible saga leaves us with one big, lingering question. When you look at the entire story, from the chaos of the kings to the fire on Mount Carmel to that whisper in the cave, it kind of forces you to look at your own life and ask, when I'm faced with a choice, what am I listening to? Is it the thunderous applause of the crowd, all the loud and demanding opinions swirling around me? Or is it the quiet, gentle, and sometimes really challenging direction of that still, small voice?